Good morning. The Senate Armed Services Committee meets today to receive testimony from General Darren McDew on the posture of the United States Transportation Command. Transcom is more than just a functional command that moves personnel and materiel from place to place. It's a crucial asset on which our military's global power projection depends, and one we must not take for granted. As General Patton once said, the officer who doesn't know his communications and his supply as well as his tactics is totally useless. General McDew and his predecessors have warned Congress for years that the proliferation of anti-access area denial capabilities pose significant challenges for our transportation and distribution networks in contested environments. Put simply, any assumption that Transcom will have uncontested access to international airspace and sea lanes in a future conflict is increasingly outdated. Transport ships and aircraft can be held at risk over greater and greater distances. Our logistics networks are centered on large air and seaports, which serve as efficient hubs, but are also vulnerable to attack. And then there are threats on the digital battlefield. Even as cyber intrusions have become increasingly prevalent, nearly 90% of Transcom's missions are still executed over unclassified commercial communications networks. This vulnerability extends operational risk to every single combatant command that Transcom supports on a daily basis. This committee understands that efforts are currently underway to develop an overarching global plan that would articulate how Transcom would operate in a contested environment, whether that be in the air, at sea, or in cyberspace. General, I look forward to an update on this plan today and ask that you provide as many details as possible as to preliminary findings of this effort. I also hope you can discuss Transcom's inaugural war game, which took place last fall, and examine mobility and distribution operations in a contested environment. Too often, operational war games focus exclusively on combat capability and take combat logistics as a given. Combat capability is obviously important, but it doesn't matter much if it never arrives to the fight or can't be sustained once it does. I look forward to hearing the lessons learned in Transcom's war game. General McDew, it's almost 2 years since your confirmation hearing before this committee, and I'm looking forward to hearing the steps you have taken to address some of our shared concerns and what more needs to be done. In particular, this committee understands the readiness and modernization challenges across the Department of Defense also affect Transcom. A look at sea lift, for example, reveals the same downward spiral we've seen elsewhere in the military. Budget cuts mean fewer new ships, existing ships get older, maintenance gets more expensive and more difficult, readiness suffers, and more money is siphoned from future modernization to pay for current readiness. Military Sea Lift Command's organic surge sea lift fleet is essential for rapid response in the event of a crisis or wartime scenario. But the average age of ships in our surge fleet is now 39 years. Over a recent 5-month period, less than 60% of sea lift ships were able to activate during planned exercises due to various maintenance problems. The requirement for so-called roll-on, roll-off ships has been relatively stable since the 1990s. But since Desert Storm, the surge sea lift fleet has been cut nearly in half to just 27 ships. We're already 10 ships short of the current requirement, enough to move 2 full Armored Brigade combat teams, and over the next 6 years, another 9 will age out. So while I look forward to hearing how Transcom plans to address its readiness and modernization challenges, I do so fully aware that it cannot truly do so unless we in the Congress step up and do our jobs, repeal the Budget Control Act, and provide full and steady funding to meet our national security requirements. General McDew, the committee thanks you for your continued service to the nation, and we look forward to your testimony today. Senator Reed.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, General McDew, to the committee for your testimony. Thank you for your service and the service of all the men and women of Transcom. We are knowledgeable and appreciative of the critical role that Transcom plays, and thank you for your leadership. The work of Transcom may be invisible to many, but it is critical because it delivers what our forward deployed personnel need when they need it. While Transcom performs thousands of operations successfully, it is facing a number of daunting challenges. While all the military is working to respond to potential and actual cyber attacks, Transcom faces a unique set of cyber threats because it must work with private sector entities in the transportation and shipping industries to support DoD deployment operations. 3 years ago, the committee issued a report on certain aspects of Transcom's cybersecurity situation. General McDew, we would like to hear what steps you have taken to respond to the issues identified in that report and any others you may have identified since you assumed command. The Ready Reserve Force, a group of cargo ships held in readiness by the Maritime Administration, is aging and will need to be modernized over the next decade, as the chairman pointed out eloquently. DoD also needs to ensure that the Civil Reserve Air Fleet, or CRAF program, which provides as much as 40% of wartime airlift needs, remains viable after operations in Iraq and Afghanistan and will be able to provide needed surge capacity in the future. I would appreciate an update on how Transcom intends to ensure these fleets are ready to meet the command's requirements. Our global transportation capability, owned or managed by Transcom, has been one of our asymmetric advantages for many years now. However, we cannot assume that potential adversaries will allow us free rein in this area in the future. General McDew, as you said in your prepared statement about future conflicts, we expect contested global sea lanes and air routes to a degree we have not faced since World War II. We're interested in hearing how you are addressing the growing reality that the access you enjoy now may be increasingly challenged. General McDew, thank you again for your service, and I look forward to your testimony.
Welcome, General.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm glad that you pointed out that it's been 2 years since I've been here, and I have a quick opening statement, but I'd like to say that my daughter-in-law has forgiven you. If you remember 2 years ago, I sat here and I had a chance to introduce my family. And over to my left shoulder was my brand new grandson, Henry. Henry was a bit of a rotund child at about 6 months old, and you pointed out that he had not missed many meals. Most of us got a chuckle. My daughter-in-law did not get a chuckle from that.
Please ask her to accept my apologies. It's a beautiful grandchild.
Thank you,
Oops.
Chairman. But it is now part of the congressional record. Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, and distinguished members of the committee, it's an honor and a privilege to be with you here today, representing the men and women of our United States Transportation Command. I thank you for your continued support of our dedicated professionals, all working together to provide our nation with a broad range of strategic capabilities and options. I also want to emphasize the vital role our commercial industry plays, what I call our fourth component in our success. It is worth noting, yesterday was the 30th anniversary of U.S. Transcom's core staff standing up at Scott Air Force Base, and we've been going strong ever since. 30 years of history. I can say confidently that your United States Transportation Command stands ready to deliver our nation's objectives anywhere at any time. We do this in two ways. We can provide an immediate force tonight through the use of airlift and air refueling fleets, and we can provide a decisive force when needed through the use of strategic sea lift and surface assets. You see it every time you read or hear the news. When North Korea increased its provocation of our Pacific allies, America responded with assistance. U.S. Transcom delivered that assistance in the form of missile defense systems, personnel, and support equipment, moving by sea and air 3,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean. When you read about America's brigade combat teams rolling through Europe, it was U.S. Transcom's ability to provide a decisive force to reassure European allies. When America needed B-2 stealth bombers to fly 11,000 miles from Missouri to Libya and back, it was our air refuelers that got them there. From national disasters to epidemics to acts of war, the men and women of U.S. Transcom are ready to deliver this nation's aid, assistance, and indeed hope to the world. These missions must execute without fail. All the while, these great professionals quietly manage a myriad of daily tasks around the globe, most of which Americans will never read about. It takes diligence, skill, and innovation to provide that kind of readiness for America, and the men and women of U.S. Transcom have never let us down. I am proud to serve next to them, and I say with confidence that our organization is ready to respond when our nation calls. That confidence, however, is not without concern. The environment we operate in today is increasingly complex, and we expect future adversaries will be all the more versatile and dynamic, forcing us to adapt, change, and evolve. Furthermore, we are viewing potential adversaries through a trans-regional, multi-domain, and multifunctional lens, properly understanding the potential threats posed by China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, as well as violent extremists, in a global context is of utmost concern for our future national security. In each of these scenarios, logistics plays a critical but often overlooked role. Today, U.S. Transcom is critically examining how we execute our logistics mission in the contested environments of the future, a space we haven't had to operate in, logistically speaking, for a very, very long time. We are exercising and wargaming these logistics scenarios, forcing planners of every ilk to account for transportation's vital role and for the first time, potential loss. Earlier this year, U.S. Transcom held its first ever contested environment war game, imagining a scenario where we didn't dominate the skies or own the seas. This war game uncovered a surprising amount of lessons learned, which we've already started to absorb. We've adapted our tactics, techniques, and procedures accordingly, but we still have work to do. I'm also concerned about our national strategic sea lift capability. Any further delay to the recapitalization of our military sea lift fleet creates risk in our future ability to deploy forces across the globe. These concerns are compounded further by merchant marine shortages and the reduction of U.S. flagged vessels. With today's resources, we are capable of meeting today's logistics needs. However, if we, together, don't take action soon, many of our military sea lift command vessels will begin to age out by 2026. A significant portion of the DoD's wartime cargo capability moves on these ships. As a bridging solution, and with your approval, we can purchase used ships until we can build new ones ourselves. This won't solve the problem forever, and we will need your help for all of it. My final concern is the threat of attack from the cyber domain. Although cybersecurity is a DoD-wide focus area, U.S. Transcom is distinctly vulnerable because the majority of the command's transportation data resides within and travels through the unsecure commercial internet. Furthermore, unsecured networks and systems of our commercial transportation service providers, coupled with critical infrastructure requirements, almost wholly reside outside of our control. In light of these challenges, U.S. Transcom is focusing our cyber efforts on discipline, design, and defense in order to ensure we continue to accomplish our mission. The command is collaborating with U.S. Cyber Command, DoD agencies, federal cyber organizations, industry, and academia to identify and mitigate gaps and shortfalls, as well as to seize opportunities to advance our cyber resilience and improve mission assurance. I thank you again, Chairman McCain and Ranking Member Reed, and the members of the committee for inviting me to speak to you today to represent this 30-year-old command, U.S. Transcom. Our Transcom team will continue to provide joint solutions to ensure our nation is able to deliver an immediate force tonight and a decisive force when needed, anywhere in the world. I respectfully request my written testimony be submitted for the record, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Without objection, thank you very much, sir. A major concern for the Navy is the lack of sufficient U.S. flagships and a robust merchant marine to meet future demand. Is that a major concern of yours?
Yes, it is, Senator.
Do we have any plans that you know of to rectify that?
Chairman, I believe that we're working very closely with the United States Navy. The Navy understands the depth of the problem.
Do we have any plans to rectify that shortfall?
There is a Navy recapitalization plan that is being built right now. It should be unveiled in the next few weeks. I don't want to get ahead of the Navy, but we work very closely with them on that.
The real secret is that our ability to move, supply, and support modern military forces to a large degree rests on the support it receives from private sector companies, right?
It does.
And so suppose we're in a combat scenario. Can we continue to rely on those private companies or corporations to supply us with what we need?
Our U.S.-flagged fleet of ships has been a reliable partner for decades. The Merchant Marine Force that does this work is a viable and proud patriotic unit.
I guess I'm talking about having to transport troops and materiel into a contested region. Can we rely on these non-military companies such as UPS and DHL and Maersk and others to go into the combat areas?
Chairman, our first force to go into these contested environments is our organic aircraft and our organic sea lift ships.
Yes, and that's some 600 refueling tankers to transport one combat team, according to this, to the information I have. Do we have the capability to move sufficient number of individuals and materiel into a combat zone without relying on civilian sources of transportation?
Chairman, it depends on what sufficient means. If we are going to
Well,
provide
let's
the
take
initial
Korea.
force,
Let's take Korea. Suppose that a conflict broke out in Korea, and the North Koreans have some limited anti-ship capability. Can we rely on those non-military corporations to go into maritime capabilities to go into contested areas, into combat zones?
today, Chairman, I would not call upon the commercial industry to go into a contested environment. We
So
would go
you
with our
have
organic.
sufficient, so you have sufficient capability to move what we need without relying on them. Is that correct?
We have a sufficient force today, and I've talked to General Vince Brooks and his staff, to provide him what he needs in the first 30 days organically. Beyond that, we'll have to continue to assess how much of the tip fluid continues to flow and how much of that we can mitigate the threat by the time we have to get to use of commercial vessels.
According to what I am told, it can take 200 C-17 sorties to deploy a single brigade combat team. Is that your correct assessment?
I would not like to argue numbers with you at all, but I do know that
I'm not getting into an argument. I'm saying that this is the information that's provided to us by the Department of Defense. It's not my opinion. That's the information that we have from the Department of Defense. Are you able to ensure that global force projection is a primary capability given the assets that we have and not having to rely on non-DOD capabilities?
It is not.
Or say a conflict in Korea.
It is not easy. However, with a global force, and that's what U.S. Transportation Command is, and we use the forces that are available, we can do 200 C-17 swords.
So, but that, you can do 200 C-17, so that gives you one brigade combat team. I doubt if there's a conflict in Korea that one brigade combat team would be sufficient for us to reinforce our forces on the ground in Korea. What I'm saying, General, is that we are reliant to a larger and larger degree on the private sector companies. And there's great question amongst many experts that we do not have the capability, say in Korea, say in Eastern Europe, to resupply and maintain our ability to carry out success in combat. Now, are you telling me that we can and are and have that?
We do not have the capability that I wish we had, but we have a capability that can provide a force when needed, and the force that General Brooks is asking me to deliver can be delivered initially by our organic fleet. We have put a lot of capability in the commercial sector.
Into contested areas.
We've put a lot in the contested area, in the commercial sector, that we can't rely on in the contested area. But the initial force can be brought by organic fleets, and then we'll have to see what we can do after that. It is a challenge because of how we've gotten to where we've gotten here.
Well, General, to quote, "see how we can do after that," is not comforting to this committee. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me focus on the issue of cyber, which you brought up, and I brought up in my comments. And as you know, the committee did a report based upon incidents of your contractors, private contractors, in June 2012 through June 2013, where there was cyber breaches. And thank Transcom because they cooperated in the report. And just a few points emerged that were very critical, and want to get your sort of sense of how much progress you've made. First, there appeared back then to be confusion within DOD about what information relating to cyber compromise of private sector contractors may be lawfully shared. That's one issue. Second, Transcom had not provided other DOD components of the FBI a list of operationally critical contractors about whom the command would like to be alerted when a compromise occurs. And then there was gaps in cyber reporting requirements contained in Transcom's contracts, although I must give you credit, sir, because Transcom was the first DOD component to require contractors to report cyber intrusions. Can you comment on these issues and in general where we are?
Yes, Senator, we have transformed our view of cyber. Last year's cyber roundtables that we did 3 separate sets of cyber roundtables to get us to a different level of awareness and knowledge. And what that has driven us to do is that our contracts are now more cyber aware. The way we deal with contractors is more cyber aware, and we're asking industry to partner with us to set a higher cyber standard. The problem we have is sitting in the seam between DOD and commercial industry is that the rule sets are different. We can defend the Department of Defense networks, but we don't have any control over what happens in the civil networks. And sometimes a commercial company is disincentivized to report an intrusion. And sometimes they don't have the wherewithal to know that they've had an intrusion. Those things need to be squared away. So we're partnering with Cybercom and also the interagency to see where the FBI and DHS can maybe look at those intrusions differently. I'm having a meeting with them later this week because I believe the commercial viability of the company is one thing, national security is another. And because a company is intruded upon, it's not always just a commercial problem.
Are you planning to suggest legislative proposals that would give you or give the Department of Defense more authority in this regard, or clarify its authority? Maybe clarification is a better word.
Well, I'm not sure that DOD needs more authority, but I believe that the bridging of the gap between DOD and the rest of federal government is needed to happen, and to see where we can square that away.
Let me follow up on the 2 of the questions that Senator McCain asked. First, as we move to more emphasis on the Pacific, particularly North Korea, there's the issue of platforms, both air and sea, but there's also the issue of facilities. Do you have an assessment of the needs for docks or airfields that have to be repaired or remediated so that you can continue to operate?
We do a regular annual assessment, a rotating assessment through every year, and we publish an en route master plan of ports and rail all around the world. We believe we have sufficient facilities globally to handle most contingencies. Unfortunately, until you get into the fight, you don't know specifics about which exact ones you're going to need when, because you don't know what the enemy is going to take away from you. So based on initial assessments we did, and then we continue to assess as the enemy moves and we counter-move. We believe that in the early days, as we provide ways to mitigate the threat, maybe we have greater access in some places that we don't think of using now, and we have to be resilient enough to go to those places.
And with regard to the issue of ships, particularly, or aircraft going into contested areas, do you have any contractual authority to compel them to do that, or do they have the opportunity in the contract to just simply decline?
So it's twofold. We also have a responsibility to them to not send them into harm's way if they're not prepared to go. In particular with the Civil Reserve Air Fleet, right now with the FAA trusts us to make the determination on when a place is sufficient to send in a commercial aircraft. We owe that to them. we also owe them a little bit better training on tactics and procedures, and maybe some way of how to operate in a convoy environment. My Military Sealift Command commander right now is trying to work with commercial industry to see where we can strengthen their ability to operate, at least on the edges of the contested environment.
And again, is there any consideration to legislation that might give you more appropriate authorities in this regard? Because the problem that the chairman's pointing out is a real problem.
The problem is indeed real. We have gone down the path of trying to work with industry because they've been beside us for a long time, and we believe they will want to. But we don't want to put a ship in harm's way, because losing the ship is worse than not sailing the ship.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
General McDew, one of the problems that we have when you're trying to move this equipment, the function that you perform, it's either by sea or by air. Air, obviously, is one that meets the needs because you don't have the time that you normally would have to be dealing with. But we also know the risk that's out there. We know the surface-to-air capability of the enemy. We know the air-to-air capability. We know those problems that exist, and as was pointed out by the chairman in his opening statement, we aren't able to handle the capacity by air, so it ends up being by ship. Then you have problems there too. So with the age of our fleets right now, 39 years for the ships, and then when you look at the C-5s, the C-17s, you look at what we're doing right now in Ticker Air Force Base, trying to take the KC-135s down to the skeleton and then just rebuilding them. How big of a problem do you see this today, and as you look into the future, to perform the functions that you're supposed to be performing with just the sheer age of this stuff? You know, the KC-46 won't be around for some time to relieve this. So what kind of a problem is this?
Senator, recapitalizing all of those fleets is a problem. Doing it underneath the budget constraints we've had will be nearly impossible. And also, we owe the Congress possibly better numbers. I have been part of propelling some numbers of tankers that are needed to provide help around the globe, numbers of ships. Well, our contested environment war game tells us that those numbers may not be sufficient, because we have never, in the history that I can remember, planned for attrition of our logistics. And we haven't fought for 70+ years an adversary that can do that to us. And so age is one level of attrition. Enemy action is another level of attrition. Lack of sufficient maintenance so that it's reliable is another. And the tanker problem, if we're going to go after 12 airplanes a year of the KC-46 of recapping, that's going to produce risk long-term as these airplanes continue to age as we recap.
Well, that's true, and it's also, as you're making the decisions now, I can remember when we were making decisions on the C-17. Remember, we talked about at one time it was going to be 210, that it was going to be 100, and anyway, Cheney came along and actually increased that. But every time you make those changes, you are affecting risk, and that's the thing that concerns me. Now, the chairman brought out our reliance upon the private sector in some of these areas. I was reading in your prepared statement, and I'll just repeat it here. Unfortunately, U.S.-flagged international commercial fleet and mariner pool has shrunk over time. While we have contingency plans, further reductions may cause us to investigate other options, such as using more foreign-flagged international commercial vessels manned by foreign crews during the crisis of war. American shipping companies continue to reflag vessels to foreign nations, diminishing the size of our commercial fleet. Now, we had said that our commercial fleet should be able to take care of some 90% of the need. My concern is every bit as much the reliance upon the other countries as it is being reliant upon the private sector. Do you agree with that?
Senator, we have always been a nation that has had a large enough maritime fleet, and we've been a maritime country, and we've always had the ability to do that indigenous to U.S. flagged vessels.
Yeah, but that's what we've always been able to do. That's not the case now.
We are in jeopardy now. Now
Yeah.
we're at about 80 ships.
So this is a new threat that wasn't there before, and I agree with that, and I'm concerned about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General McDew, thank you for being here. I certainly appreciate what you said in your statement about the importance of Transcom to any action we take anywhere in the world. So thank you and everyone who serves in Transcom. As I know you're aware, the 157th Air Refueling Guard Wing is at Pease in New Hampshire, and we are one of those places that's going to first get the KC-46A tankers. And I've had a chance to go up with the 157th and watch them refuel, and am amazed at the skill and precision that all of those flyers have, and how important it is to have that refueling capability as we're looking at what we need to do around the world. And while I appreciate what you said about our problems aren't going to be solved by the KC-46, can you talk about how important it is to have those planes delivered? And I know the delivery date has slipped a little bit, so what are we doing to make sure that they're coming in on time where we need them to go?
Senator, behind the cyber threat, tanker recap is probably my #1 priority. If there was one thing that keeps me awake at night, and that's the ability to provide the air refueling support that we need globally to respond anywhere around the world at the time of our choosing. The 157th is one of those units we can count on to do that. The KC-46 recap, or recapping tankers writ large, is a very, very important program that can't be allowed to slip much more. We're already assuming some level of risk, and that's before we learned about the things that we have going on in contested environments. We don't plan for losing tankers. And if we don't recap them, any loss is more catastrophic.
Thank you. I certainly agree with that. I know that when we were in Afghanistan and Iraq, one of the challenges that we had at the height of those conflicts has been the ability to have our fuel keep up with the actions that were going on in the field. And one of the things that I think the military has done an excellent job of is research into alternatives, ways to make us less dependent on those fuel lines and particularly foreign sources of oil. Can you talk a little bit about how you see the importance of those alternative fuels as you're looking at Transcom's future?
Senator, I believe that a level of resilience across the entire portfolio is needed. The ability to have different sources of fuel, the ability to have different methods of delivering that fuel. DLA and all of our partners really work hard at that. I think it's important that we can't be just relying on one source for anything.
And are you concerned about the progress that they're making, or how are we doing? Is there any branch that's falling behind that we need to be worried about?
You know, with technology, always faster is better, but sometimes the journey is important as you're going down new innovative paths. So I can't tell anybody that's falling behind, but I think research and development on different ways of doing fuels is going to be important.
And just following up a little bit on the cyber concern, what more can we do on this committee to support the efforts to address cyber, both the intrusions and the cyber attacks that we're seeing, and how can we help encourage the private sector that we're relying on to come to the table? Do we need to give you more authority? Do we need to take action that's going to address the private sector? What should this committee be looking at to support your efforts?
I would ask, Senator, that this committee and all the committees in Congress, as well as the American public, become as paranoid about the cyber threat as I have become.
Oh, I think we're pretty paranoid, actually.
I'm not sure in the commercial industry that every CEO sees the cyber threat as something beyond their commercial viability. And I'm not sure every CEO understands that it's CEO business and not the IT department's business.
Thank you. A very important observation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General McDew, thank you for your service to our country. A unique and significant part of the nation's air mobility resources, Civil Reserve Air Fleet, as the chairman has indicated, commonly referred to as CRAF. The average American may be surprised to know that in 1991's Operation Desert Storm, 60% of all deployed troops and 25% of all cargo airlift went by commercial carriers, not military airlift. At the time, the Air Force had about 330 C-5s and C-141s for strategic airlift. Today, your posture statement says the craft requirement has grown from 60 to 90% for all passengers and from 25 to 40% of all cargo. Meanwhile, the latest numbers that I've been shown, there are roughly 280 C-5s and C-17s in the inventory for this mission. This reduction of 50 aircraft since 1991, combined with the erosion of sea lift availability, tells me that our ability to protect or to project military power is increasingly tied to our commercial air segment, blurring the lines between military and non-military organizations that are required for national defense. Specifically, you've noted that one of the greatest challenges that Transcom faces is from cyber attacks. Because it's not a DoD entity, the Civil Reserve Air Fleet resides outside the direct reach of cybercom. How can we make certain that this fleet receives the same level of cyber defense as our strategic air units?
Right now, I have no mechanism to ensure that that can happen. I do not have the authority to compel a commercial industry to bring their standards up to the level that we have inside, nor are we assured exactly what that standard is. We do know that inside the Department of Defense, U.S. Cybercom and others have established a standard that we believe that our networks are protected. Outside, I guarantee you that every CEO thinks that they have the level they think they need. Reconciling what they think and what reality is important. Sharing information across from DoD to commercial industry, federal government to commercial industry is one. I can talk to CEOs, and I've talked to some that have no idea that they have been attacked. That's a problem. So before you can assure that they're protected, they have to have the wherewithal to know that they've been attacked.
Department of Homeland Security, which is charged with protecting critical infrastructure, defines it as the assets, systems, and networks, whether physical or virtual, so vital to the United States that their incapacitation or destruction would have a debilitating effect on security, national economic security, national public health or safety, or any combination thereof. My question, I guess, would be, given our significant reliance on CRAF, would you consider it to be critical infrastructure?
I would, and I would also broaden the definition. There are many more things because of the risks we've taken in the portfolio over the last couple decades. Many more things are in the private sector. All of those things I rely upon for national security, and many of those things aren't thought of that way on a regular basis.
Are there any other non-military elements critical to Transcom's mission that you would consider critical infrastructure?
Critical, I don't want to get into the actual definition of critical, but there are elements of commercial everyday use, road, rail, seaports, that are all critical. When we need to go to war as a nation, they're all critical.
What interaction does Transcom have with the Department of Homeland Security regarding such infrastructure?
Most of our links are through the Department of Transportation. We do have links to Department of Homeland Security. We meet regularly. I've got a liaison officer from both the FBI, and we work extensively with the interagency. The problem is, I don't know if we have sung loud enough. We have just learned a number of things ourselves over the last year about how vulnerable we are. And we've learned some things over the last year on how we can protect ourselves better. Now we're able to be a better partner, I believe, in the interagency.
General, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, it's good to see you. Thank you for your service. I want to talk about Red Hill. The Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility at Joint Base Pearl Harbor is a key component of the Navy's operations in the Pacific and Asia to provide secure underground fuel storage for ships and aircraft, and it is of vital strategic importance. For anyone who hasn't visited the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility, it is massive, and the engineering feat to create that facility is in the order of Hoover Dam. So we're talking about a huge facility. Can you discuss the impact that the secure storage facility has on the reliability and resilience of refueling in the Pacific? And what would happen if this facility were closed?
I can't speak directly to that one. That would be more in the purview of DLA and our partners at the Defense Logistics Agency. However, anything that lessens our ability to have fuel available in the Pacific region is detrimental to our ability to go to war.
Have you ever visited this facility?
Not directly, Senator.
If you ever get to Hawaii, please do so. Well, I'm sure you do get to Hawaii. Do so. The Air Force has been using active associate units for many years. These can be very strong units showing the collaborative capabilities of joint active duty and guard organizations. What are your thoughts on active associate units, and could you use more in the tanker and airlift fleet?
Senator, active associate units have been part of our DNA in the transportation business since the 60s. They've been a viable way of augmenting and strengthening our ability to provide air refueling, in particular in airlift. I think it's vital going forward that every unit, and I believe the Air Force has this as part of their plan, every unit in the KC-46 will be associated in some way. We can do more with many. Some units are better at this than others and have a proven track record. Some need some help. And as we go forward, I believe that we'll get better and better at doing this in the future.
Admiral Harris testified before SASC last week that of the 5 global challenges that currently drive U.S. defense planning and budgeting are in the Asia-Pacific region. How does tyranny of distance in the Asia-Pacific region impact your planning for the projection of forces and sustainment in the region, and how would those plans be modified if more than one global challenge needed to be immediately addressed in the region?
I don't like to disagree with my good friend Harry Harris, and I understand why he focuses on that particular region, but I tend to focus on the globe, and there's not one of those problem sets that isn't resident everywhere on the globe. And so from my portfolio, it is a global problem. It is a trans-regional problem. And we need to be able to make sure that every combatant commander that has a region understands that they may not be the primary effort depending on what's happening around the globe.
So since you look at the threats globally, and of course, PACOM represents 51% of the world's area. And so, especially with the threat of North Korea, how do you go about determining what resources you would place with regard to the needs of our combatant commanders?
We respond to the priorities set by the Secretary of Defense and through the Joint Staff. And so the priority of effort must be set. And right now, the priority of effort is providing General Brooks and Harry Harris the resources they need to ensure that they can respond to whatever provocative actions are taken by North Korea. If they're no longer the priority of effort, we swing to some other part of the world. We don't have the resources to be everywhere for everybody.
And so you say right now the priority area is the DMZ and Pacific Command, Harry Harris.
Well, I may have misspoken slightly. So I did say that. I am giving a lot of effort to Harry Harris and Vince Brooks because I know that they've got a challenge that they're facing immediately. Scaparati, Votel, all of them have issues that they're dealing with, and we try to work around the globe for all of them.
Thank you. This question has come up before, our reliance on commercial assets for power projection and sustainment. And if sea lanes and air lanes are compromised, how will the U.S. either defend our commercial partners or assume a larger role in transportation?
Senator, one of the reasons that I start calling the commercial industry my fourth component, I've got an air component, I've got an Army component, I've got a Navy component, but a very important component that we have not looked at it that way is commercial industry. Some of my predecessors actually wouldn't even call them our partners. wouldn't say the term out loud, and I understand why they did it at the time. But today's environment, I have to and must rely on this commercial industry to get things done. And so we owe them a better view of their resilience. We owe them a better view of how they're going to contend in contested environments, and we owe that to them in partnering with them.
So you're taking specific steps to bring them more into an understanding of the challenges that we face.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
And through organizations like the National Defense Transportation Association, which most of them are members of, we work on subcommittees to try to get after these problems.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. General, it is good to see you. Thanks for being here. And your grandson, I'm sure, is quite lovely. My own daughter, we called her Chubbo Bubbo when she was a baby as well. But thank you for your testimony this morning. I do appreciate you being here. As a transportation officer, I do have a lot of respect and understanding of the important role that Transcom plays for all of us that have served in uniform. So thank you so much. The risk you described, from the cyber threats to the refueling shortfalls, could have incredible impacts on our national security. I'm glad we're addressing those today. You mentioned in your testimony that your tankers are conducting aerial refueling operations every 5 minutes over the skies of Iraq and Afghanistan. And when I hear about that, I think about how we are misallocating fourth-generation fighter jets and tankers to bomb a pickup truck when they could be keeping Russia or China at bay. To me, it highlights why the services need to continue pursuing highly lethal and low-cost solutions in one theater to allow better use of high-cost technologies where they are needed most. Can you describe to me, General, how pursuing more cost-effective tactics on the battlefield can help alleviate some of the stress that we've put on Transcom?
You know, I believe, though, first of all, Senator, thanks very much. There's a bunch of folks in the cornfields of Illinois right now that loved every statement you had to say about the wonders of the transporters. You know, what we do, I believe, does keep the 4+1 priorities and our enemies at bay. They understand that we still have the capacity to bring a decisive force or an immediate force when needed. I still believe the most adversaries get that. We are challenged at how well we can do it, how long we can do it, but I still believe it causes them pause. Going forward, how long will it stay that way? Innovation will help us. We've got to get after autonomy. We've got to get after a lot of different ways that we can use cheaper methods in some regions, because we will never have enough resources to place them in every region around the world permanently.
Truly, thank you. I appreciate that. And General, U.S. Special Operations teams are some of the most utilized forces against our current enemies, but unfortunately, their remote locations and need for secrecy create quite a unique transportation challenge. As you probably know, the Special Forces team that led the American invasion in Afghanistan rode in on horseback. And just tying in with that, what challenges do you face in Transcom when you're seeking to support our special operators?
One is to let General Thomas know that I don't have horses, and I don't get
no stables, no horses.
General Thomas and his team and our team at Transcom talk regularly. We understand that they're in small places with small teams doing big business. And so we work very closely with them on both how they contract, how they supply themselves, and we try to make sure that we're giving them the value of our expertise. They do a lot of things well. We do this well.
Very good. I appreciate that. You had given some inspiring remarks on innovative thinking last month, telling your service members that you needed true innovation and not just technology, and I do agree with that. I also agree with your remarks about our failing acquisition system. As you say, taking 10 years to develop a weapon system will leave us behind our adversaries. And how is that failing acquisition system impacting Transcom, and what can we do better?
It's a broad problem, as you know, Senator. One of the things is everything from how we train our acquisition professionals who do the best they can with the tools they're given, to giving them better tools, and then giving them different expectations. Sometimes commanders need to be more involved with setting an expectation for what's going to come out of that acquisition process and how quickly. And then sometimes we have to press the system, because on the edges of the regulations are opportunities. And maybe we haven't explored all the edges, but we do need to get after better training and better tools.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, General, for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, General, I didn't know until today that you spent your first 5 years in the Air Force at Loring Air Force.
Actually, 5.5 years, 6 winters.
5.5 years, 6 winters, and I always knew you were a man of insight, intellect, and character, and now I understand where it came from. That Aroostook County will do that for you. I also understand Senator Shaheen mentioned an air refueling.
I think we need the regular order here.
I won't violate Rule 19, Mr. Chairman, but I have to mention the 101st Air Refueling Wing in Bangor. I was with the chairman in Qatar a couple of years ago, and they were proudly serving there, and we affectionately refer to them as the Maniacs, and they do a wonderful job. In fact, I flew one of they allowed me to fly the boom in one of the planes. For some reason, they didn't allow me to fly the boom when there was a jet aircraft attached to it. But
I appreciate that.
yes, well, I thought you might want to know that. I know Senator Rounds talked a bit about the cyber issue, and I'm gravely concerned because, as you have testified, your capacity is very dependent upon commercial partners. And you said that every CEO says they're safe, and I don't believe it. And I hope that you can do more than admonish them. I would hope that we have these contracts with them, which they believe are profitable. That's why they enter into them. But the contracts, in my view, should have conditions to take seriously this threat, because this could be a critical disruption that would absolutely devastate our ability to respond to a crisis.
Senator, one of the first steps we believe is setting a clear cybersecurity standard. That standard has to continue to evolve as we learn more and the tools get better on how do we defend networks. So it can't be a static requirement. The next thing we probably need to get to is some level of third-party verification that companies are complying with said standard. And we're not there yet, but we're working with industry right now to try to get after both of those.
And testing the system, wargaming or testing the system to be sure that it actually will work under a stressful condition, a red team kind of approach, which I know that other areas of the government do, and I think it's been very effective. So that's an area of vulnerability I hope that you will really focus upon, because when we need it, we've got to have that commercial capacity there.
Right. And Senator, as you know, right now, we have no authority to compel commercial industry to do that, nor am I seeking it. Right now, we're working with them to collaboratively get to a place, and also working with DHS and FBI to try to help push.
Well, but I would suggest you do have you have contracts with these folks, and they're getting paid high-test U.S. dollars, and that gives you some power to make some pretty serious requirements. And I urge you to set your general counsel loose on that issue. Let me go back to the war game, which I understand you participated in. Was it successful? Well, I'll leave the question at that, and then we'll explore the answer.
You know, when I first started doing war games and exercises as a young officer, success was defined differently. As I'm a little bit more senior now, become a senior citizen in the United States military, success is a level of knowledge attained at the end of it that you can do something with.
Exactly. That was going to be my question. Success is not winning. Success is learning.
And so that journey was so profitable for us as a command that I can't even put a dollar figure on it. It is now driving everything we think about mission assurance in our portfolio, everything.
Well, let me ask about a specific problem that I think we're all facing. We're certainly facing in the Air Force generally, and it faces you both in commercial and Air Force. The pilot shortage, the looming pilot shortage. Isn't that essentially a kind of logistical challenge? We can't get troops places if we don't have pilots, and there's a shortage. We're having, Senator Cotton and I are having a meeting on this in the next several weeks in the Air Force, but it's happening on the commercial side as well. Is this a concern?
It is a concern. We're actually showing shortages across several places in our portfolio, from mariners to pilots to truck drivers. Each of those has its own problems in the manpower solution area. Right now, the Air Force Chief of Staff and the Commander of Air Mobility Command are trying to meet with the CEOs of the major airlines to get after how they partner differently to improve that problem.
Are you comfortable, one final question, are you comfortable with the relationship with the commercial industry on the sea lift side, on the air side, that this is an effective, they'll be there when we need them, I guess is the question?
I am confident, Senator, but I'm also confident that they don't know where there is. I'm confident we haven't fully defined the there for them yet enough, and we've not thought our way through what does it mean to go to war reliant upon this much commercial activity in a contested environment.
I would suggest that wargaming and stress testing would be very important, particularly where you don't have direct control over these assets.
We're with you, and we're working on it right now.
Thank you very much, General.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. General McDew, thank you for being here. Just to briefly touch on the cyber discussion, if I were planning a way to disrupt our ability to, your ability to play your role in the logistics chain, it'd be one of the first places I'd go find the supplier network. If you go back and take a look at the exercise, the 580 Stryker tires, I don't know how much you have in inventory, but if that's scaled to a large engagement or large deployment, I'd go after whatever that supply chain looks like and try to disrupt their ability to communicate with your organization. The one question I'd like to get an answer to, though, is that I think if you're going to try to get, it's the weakest link, and if the DoD feels relatively comfortable that they've are protecting their systems, that's great. But if major suppliers in the supply chain are vulnerable, then it doesn't really matter. It just means that you're not going to be able to execute. So why wouldn't we start creating, in your acquisitions hat or with your expertise in acquisitions, a tiebreaker for, if we've got to come up with standards, and I get the third party. I used to be in a firm that did ethical hack testing. So you need third-party verification, but why not a tiebreaker between potential contractors that depends upon their level of sophistication and penetrability? And why wouldn't you be seeking the authorities, if it's necessary, for you to have that baked into any kind of acquisition contracts or RFPs or selections going forward?
I believe we have the authority right now to bake it in. We may not have the full knowledge on how to bake it in. And so we're working on those very things. I've challenged my acquisition team to some of those very things. But we found over time, if the commercial industry is my fourth component, it's better to work with them than against them. And so we believe that we're working together, maybe not as quickly as we want. And so I may have to turn the heat up a little bit. And the first heat is to set a clear, definable cyber standard that evolves over time, and then go after third-party verification to ensure they're in compliance.
What Senator King brought up, the learnings from the recent exercise, but with the 12 ships, 5 failures, and I already mentioned the Stryker tires, I'm not sure if just learning is winning. I think if you were to scale that, this is obviously a war game. There's not the added level of complexity of actually going into a contested area, and that by itself can create distractions and probably cause a higher failure rate just because things are moving quickly. So how are we, and it looks like, based on what I've read, that it did look like it was a lack of training on the part of contractors for some of, at least for the Strykers. I'm not sure about the ships. Where do you get the resources to do that? How do you actually get them trained up to a level to where you can rely on this a pretty significant component on contractors?
Any place that we look inside of our portfolio, we're struggling on a regular basis with how do you get beyond what you can do on a daily basis. I have sufficient manpower and expertise to do our job every single day. And under sequestration, we lost some manpower, but we're still sufficient to do that work every day. What we're struggling with right now is our ability to think forward, our ability to innovate, our ability to come after resiliency standards, and to be resilient ourselves we've gotten so efficient and lean that some of this stuff just takes more time because you don't have the people there to do it.
It seems to me, based on some responses to some of the other members, that we have the ability for a short term to basically be able to support in a short-term environment. But if we got into a protracted environment, it doesn't sound like you have a high level of confidence, whatever we may be able to perform over some period of time, that we could do on a sustained basis. Is that fair to characterize your comments that way?
I think some of it is I'm a bit inarticulate. And I'm trying not to pin myself down by specifying a period of time. Protracted is a word that can mean anything to anybody. Is it 1 month, 2 months, 6 months? In some of the conflicts, depending on the level of classification we can go up to 6 months fairly easily. Beyond 6 months, there's a challenge. So it depends on what conflict and what the level of contested environment there is as to how far that protraction can be.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General McDew, it's great to have you here. Before I ask a few questions, I have to join some of my colleagues in giving accolades to the Michigan Air National Guard and to our 127th Air Refueling Group out of Selfridge.
Can I get the chairman to acknowledge one thing? During my during my confirmation hearing, he chastised me because I actually said nice things about all the units as every senator brought up their units. I have refrained from doing that this time.
It's an impressive improvement.
Well, I will give those accolades, and I appreciate your nod that they are doing a great job, General. My question, John McDew, is that China has made significant investments globally in ports and railways. And by some estimates, China has some degree of investment in nearly 2/3 of the world's top 50 ports, which handle 67% of the global container volume. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, or CFIUS, reviews transactions that result in control of U.S. businesses by foreign entities to determine if there could be an impact on national security. But CFIUS does not have a role if there is not a U.S. nexus for an investment, merger, or takeover. And I know you have a very deep understanding of the link between investments in strategic assets and U.S. national security. But my question is, should analysts in the U.S. government and military pay more attention to foreign investment in strategic assets like ports around the world?
Yes, Senator.
And could you elaborate on that, please?
You know, in my business, I didn't know the number, the 2/3 number, but I can't imagine, I don't see many ports around the world where the Chinese aren't investing. And I know that on one level in this country, we're linked economically. And they're not an adversary today, but they have potential to be one in the future. Anybody that is investing globally in ports, and if we're a maritime nation, we ought to be concerned about their feelings about freedom of access and how we operate around the globe. And they have not shown that freedom of access means the same to them as it does to us.
So are you concerned then about the potential for strategic investments by other nations could have on your ability to operate? Is that what I'm hearing from your answer?
I am, and that's one of the reasons that I spend a great amount of my time traveling around the world, and in particular working with the State Department, strengthening relationships that we have in countries and having them fully understand why those relationships are important and their ports and their rail infrastructure is important to us.
Yeah. Well, we've talked a great deal about some of your challenges in terms of capacity to move both fuel and especially heavy material with sea left operations. If you'd talk a little bit about prepositioned forces and the importance of that. Certainly that's one way to deal with the challenges of moving something from A to B is to already have moved it to B prior to a conflict. We have challenges in Europe to move heavy material should we see increased aggressive behavior there, certainly with what's happening in Korea as well. Please discuss the importance of prepositioned forces, and do you believe that perhaps we should consider increasing the amount of prepositioned equipment in various strategic locations?
Well, I believe first, Senator, we need a clear strategy of what we want to achieve in a particular region. That strategy then needs to be informed by the resourcing to do whatever that strategy would call us to do. Pre-positioning forces have always been important resources for us. They have become more important as we've withdrawn forces from places around the world and brought them back into the CONUS, because now we're a projecting force. With that, as you said, having stuff already at B is very, very helpful. Increasing, to ensure that each one of those stocks is fully upgraded, i.e. is it new equipment? Is it equipment that has at least been tested? Is all of the equipment sets there? All of that important, and it all plays together.
Thank you, General. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, thank you for your service and dedication to the country. Last week, Admiral Harry Harris addressed the resources requirements to conduct military operations in the Asia Pacific in the event of hostilities. And he told this committee that he had the forces in place to, quote, fight tonight if necessary, but that what concerned him was the, quote, follow-on resources and how to get those how those follow-on resources would get to the region in terms of airlift and sea lift. General, do you share Admiral Harris's concerns?
I believe that Admiral Harris has a right to be concerned because it's his AOR. And I believe that he has a point to be made in that any time we have to project a force, we ought to be concerned on how it's going to get there. We are no longer assured that everything that we send from the CONUS will arrive at its point of destination. It could be because it's old. It could be because the weather. It could be because the enemy had a vote. So I am concerned. Now, from my discussions with him and with General Vince Brooks, the forces, the immediate follow-on forces that he needs, we're ready to send them.
So what most worries you with respect to our ability to flow resources into the Asia-Pacific theater?
Our ability to rely upon the commercial industry, which we'll have to rely on over time, and how long the environment remains contested and to what level. Each of those are a bit of unknowns, and how we'll maneuver through that space is going to be vitally important for how long protraction is and what protraction will mean.
So let's shift to a different topic. The past decades, the United States has had the luxury of having secure air and sea lines of communication. Given the increasing anti-access aerial denial efforts of China, there's a chance we could be denied that luxury in a future conflict. A recent article by Dean Cheng, as a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation, posited that, quote, the ability of the Chinese to deploy substantial forces into the Central Pacific would place American logistics and support forces at risk. The loss of one or more underway replenishment ships would rapidly curtail the ability of American surface forces, including aircraft carriers, to operate. What is Transcom's plan to replenish ships and aircraft in the event that we must fight our way into an area where anti-access aerial denial has succeeded?
Senator, without getting into too much level of classification, I tell you we're in new territory. As you said, we've not been in this place in decades. Right. And so I believe that the Navy in particular, the Air Force, are both working on plans that get back to dominating those domains. But realizing that the logistics infrastructure has not been challenged for so long, it's just a new place for us. And we're having to go after that. I believe that we're making progress, not as fast as we all want it to be.
On another topic, one of the critical backgrounds of Air Mobility Command is the tactical airlift capacity of the C-130 Hercules. The 136th Airlift Wing, part of the Texas Air National Guard, and you're free to defy the chairman and praise them vociferously, is flying C-130Hs and performing extraordinarily well. You expressed concern in your House testimony last month that, quote, a continued modernization efforts in our C-130H fleet must be prioritized as a relatively inexpensive means of maintaining critical capacity. Could you expand on those sentiments?
I believe that one of the things we've got to look at as we look at our tactical airlift capability is is to ensure that all of those units that fly those units, those airplanes, have the wherewithal to fly in the new airspace and are modern enough to continue to be a viable resource. I was an old C-130 pilot myself. I flew E models. If anybody had E models today, I say we need to retire them all. They're all gone. But depending on which level of H, it's just a matter of a software upgrade. So I believe we're okay. And I would make sure that we're not over-prioritizing C-130s to the detriment of tankers right now, because that's a higher priority need for me.
Thank you, General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, General. And I know well that cornfield you referenced. It looks familiar since it is right across the border. I understand the importance of Scott Air Force Base, not just to Transcom and our military, but to the region in St. Louis. And I am a big fan of all the work you do there, and I'm pleased that we're having this hearing today. Let's talk a little bit about contested environments and airlift in contested environments. Since my colleague from Texas was talking about his unit, I know you know I'm going to mention the 139th because, as you're well aware, this is an international training school for resupply in contested environments. And that's obviously at Rosecrans, once again, right in the heart of America. We call it the Top Gun of airlift. I think that's an accurate description since I've run into people who have been trained at Rosecrans literally all over the world, particularly when I've been to Iraq and Afghanistan. Could you talk a little bit about the plan for the testing new equipment that we're going to have dedicated training rather than having to pull these aircraft out of units for training that they are trying to site for C-130Hs, each a different variant with a training wing. And we are hopeful, obviously, that that would get sited at St. Joe because of the inherent capabilities we have and the advantage of the location and the already international clientele we have in terms of our allies getting trained in this important resupplying in contested environments. Talk to me, if you would, about the 139th Airlift and the training that goes on there and what your view is of that capability in terms of training in contested environment.
Well, I believe that the instructors we have at Rosecrans are some of the best in the C-130 business. They have a lot of experience. They've been flying the airplane for a long time, and they're steeped in tactics, techniques, and procedures for the aircraft. So it is a resource that we've got to rely on as we go talking more broadly about contested environments. I've tasked Air Mobility Command to lead a contested environment summit. I would hope that and I got to believe that they will have Rosecrans members there to help us get after solutions to our contested environment war game level of learning. We learned a bunch of things that should scare us. Now we're going after what do we do about it, and how do we fix and mitigate some of these concerns?
Let me talk a little bit about what your testimony, which I found stunning, was the shortage of 75,000 licensed drivers in the trucking industry, and understanding how important this is for our capabilities in terms of supply and resupply. The projected shortfall is due to increase to 890,000 drivers by 2027. That the current shortage has the trucking industry operating at a 95% capacity every day, which basically leaves no surge capacity for high-volume DoD requirements in a time of conflict without severely disrupting commercial services across the country, which is a whole nother price we would have to pay in our economy if that were the case. While I want to make sure that we are making it as easy as possible for trained military to transition into the civilian life, and obviously we've got a lot of great truck drivers that are trained in the military, once again, trained in my state at Fort Leonard Wood, I'm worried that even if we put every single truck driver we train in the military into the civilian trucking industry, we're still not going to have enough. So let me ask you, have you all looked? I worry about driverless trucks in terms of what it's going to do to jobs in this country, but have you all begun to to talk about in the future the use of driverless trucks in this capacity, and could you speak to that for a few moments?
Senator, we've actually looked at autonomy across our broad portfolio, from ships to trains to trucks to airplanes. We believe that you must have that level of technological advancement as you go forward. Somewhere along the way, we're losing the young men and women who grow up wanting to be truck drivers and airplane drivers and train drivers. And so with the lack of capacity, the technology will have to take over. We just have to have this technology going forward. And I believe that the advances being made by some in the civil sector is pretty impressive.
It is, and I know that we've got some autonomous buses going now and other trucks. Have you reached out to some of the companies that are doing this to see if it would be possible for you all to do some pilot work, maybe over on the base at Scott, to see, to begin to get your arms around what driverless trucks would feel like in terms of your need to supply our troops?
Most of that work is being done in the services and the organized training and equip role. The Army is working a lot on autonomous vehicles. The Navy has some autonomous vehicles, and the Air Force is also working with some semi-autonomous and autonomous work through DARPA.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, General. I want to quickly ask about the importance of our non-military agencies and assistance to your mission. Transcom maintains a presence around the world, and we need other countries' ports and rail and road networks to be upgraded and to be secure so that those countries can receive our military equipment, and we rely on diplomatic agreements with other countries for our pre-positioned equipment. So I just want to ask, General, would a reduction in funding to the civilian agencies and programs that enable your global distribution networks make your job easier or harder?
Senator, our job as a COCOM with global responsibilities relies on every partner we can get our hands on. One of our biggest partners is the State Department and a lot of our interagency partners around the globe because they help us build relationships in areas that we can't be at on a regular basis. And you can't build a relationship when you need a relationship.
Right. So I take it the answer is it would make your job a lot harder.
Make it a little harder.
Make it a little harder. I agree with this, and I point out that the administration is seeking significant reduction to the Department of State and to USAID. Of course, our military is critically important to our security, but we can't forget that non-military programs are critical enablers of the military to do the jobs that you need to do. Now, General, I also want to ask you another question. When you testified in front of the House Armed Services Committee several weeks ago, you said that getting C5s out of the backup inventory was your #1 priority for the NDAA. The upgraded C5 is currently our only cargo aircraft that can make a transcontinental flight without refueling. So, General, would having those additional C5s back in inventory help mitigate your aerial refueling challenge by providing more capacity to move cargo without needing to refuel?
Well, I believe we can also do a transcontinental flight with a C-17. But the C-5s, we need those additional C-5s back in the inventory. I believe the Air Force has just recently committed to doing that over the next few years, so that will be very, very helpful.
All right, and can you just expand just a little bit on the importance of the C5, why the C5 is a critical piece of equipment for you to get your job done?
Well, it's the totality of the mission set. First, we have limited numbers of strategic assets. The C5 provides an outsized cargo capability and a long-range capability. And having been on the receiving end at a deployed location of a C5's stuff, there's nothing like a C5 load full of stuff arriving time after time after time if you're standing up an operation quickly.
Right. I understand it is the only aircraft that can carry 2 Abrams tanks, or that it can carry 6 helicopters simultaneously. So I take it that's a good boost to efforts on the ground.
That's a good thing.
That's right. Good. Well, I just want to say making sure that we have every available C5 seems pretty important to me, not to mention the fact that we have invested a lot of money to upgrade them, and now they're sitting on the ramp. The economics of that just don't add up. Westover Air Reserve Base in Massachusetts has 8 of these aircraft, and the people there tell me that these planes are in use pretty much all the time. And I'm sure they would welcome additional C-5s to be able to work on their mission. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General, for your service. I would like to focus a little bit on a topic that has been raised before, the cyber threat, and ask specifically about your experience so far with some of the contractors. Are they required to report to you incidents or episodes of cyber attack by nation states?
I believe that's a federal requirement, but they are required to report.
And do they report to you?
I believe they report to an organization called DC3. I'm trying to remember. I have to get back to you on what that stands for. We speak in acronyms, and sometimes you forget what the acronyms actually stands for. But they actually report through an organization, I believe that's part of DHS.
Part of what, sorry?
Department of Homeland Security.
So they don't report to the Department of Defense?
Not that I'm aware of. Not
But
directly.
they're under contract with the Department of Defense.
Right.
Why aren't they reporting to you?
Let me be more clear about that afterwards. I'll get back to you on the record for that. But I'm trying to remember exactly the reporting chain. The reporting requirement may be dual, and I don't want to misspeak.
I'm somewhat surprised that they are carrying out an essential national security and defense mission. They're under attack, just as they would be if they were conducting a convoy in Afghanistan, and the Department of Defense is not informed directly.
Well, part of it, Senator, is attack. So let's talk about attack for a second. So let's say today, and I hate to name a company because it'll get somebody in trouble. If someone is not necessarily contracted with us and they get attacked, that's the same as if they're actually contracted with us and they get attacked. So I don't care where they report to, because if an adversary gets on their network and stays on their network, it doesn't matter whether they're actually doing my work at the time. When the adversary moves laterally through their network and potentially invades my network.
And that's exactly the reason, General, why I think they should be reporting to you, because even if they're attacked, well, let me put it differently. It makes no difference whether they do civilian as well as military work. If they're attacked, it is an attack on a network that is performing national security, military work, and potentially not only undermines the function they do for you, but gains entry into your computer networks, meaning the Department of Defense computer networks. So I'm somewhat at a loss to know why they are not instantaneously telling you we've been attacked by Russia or China.
Part of it is I can't do anything about it. This organization that they would report to has partnership and alliances with the Department of Defense. So the Department of Homeland Security, in their role to have the non-DOD side of cyber defense, is partnered with the DOD and Cybercom. So that organization that would respond to an attack is linked that way. My organization would be interested to know that that adversary has been attacked, I mean, that company's been attacked, but we would rely on others to do something about it. We would like to know, because then it would tell us what we could do with that organization going forward.
Well, I would think for a variety of reasons you'd like to know. Have you ever asked, and have you ever sought that information?
Right. So that information sharing is what I really talk about. We have good information sharing in some areas. It can be better across in the entire spectrum, because most of the time the attack or the intrusion takes place and no one thinks it's an attack or an intrusion. It can look like a harmless mechanical failure.
Well, let me ask you this. Would you like that information directly?
I think I do need it directly. I don't need it as quickly as Cybercom needs it or DHS needs it, but I
Well,
do need the information.
You do need it directly.
Right.
When you
And-
talk about you don't need it as quickly,
Right.
if it's made available to them,
Oh, it has
could
to
be
be
made
made
available to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And the unfortunate thing, Senator, is that the speed of this domain doesn't purport well to how we do information sharing. Things happen so quickly, and we've got to not think about sharing. We just have to share in a classified way.
Thank you.
All I can say is that we need to share, but we also need to have an ability to either your organization or someone to respond and to try to prevent, which is one of the major issues that this committee is having to address, since certainly the last administration didn't. Jack?
No, sir, we're fine.
Thank you, General.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.